Welcome, everyone, to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer, and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience who enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. I give you Pascal Fintoni.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We just heard from my co-host, a marketing expert and consultant who spent his whole career helping his customers keep their marketing simple but effective. He's the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Oh, Pascal, this is episode 119. The numbers are absolutely flying by. And as always, we've got an absolutely packed show for you today. We call this our marketing magazine show. And there are all sorts of different sections. We're going to have a look at the latest news, some really interesting stuff going on in the marketing market at the moment. We've got our usual content spotlight section, and we are going to hear the name Gary Vee mentioned for the first time on the show for a long time, and Pascal's going to be having a look at MVPs. That sounds interesting. I love a good 3-letter acronym. This week in history, we'll be going back in time to see what was happening that shaped the world we live in today. And I think we've got some AI-orientated marketing tech and apps to talk about, Pascal. But as always, we'll be completing the show with our film marketing section. And you've chosen this week's film, Pascal. And it's a bit of a good one, but it's also a remake, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We're going to be talking about Flight of the Phoenix. I'm talking about the 2004 remake from the original 1965, based on a book from 1964. And it's going to be fascinating to look at the challenges of creating a remake, the reaction from critics and the public. And we're going to be kind of breaking down the trailer. We've done that, not done that for a while, and looking at some of the marketing challenges of the time. But it so happens that only a few weeks ago, I took you into, the kind of the heart of snow-covered world in The Day After Tomorrow, starring Dennis Quaid, and it's just a random selection. Now, with the Flight of the Phoenix, I'm taking into, I'm literally in the middle of the desert with Dennis Quaid again.
Yeah, although when I did watch Flight of the Phoenix last night, just to refresh my memory about it, I was quite attracted by all that desert, I have to say, because Edinburgh feels more like The Day After Tomorrow at the moment. We just seem to have had constant rain and constant cold for the whole of this year. I don't think we're getting a summer. But we've got all of that to look forward to, Pascal. I think we should kick things off and dive straight into the news.
And we begin with this stat for you. 1 in 3 senior marketers get less than 1 hour every year to present their results to the company board. This is terrible. A study of more than 550 marketers found that 30% get less than 5 minutes per month.
Growing the brand's market share is the most important job for marketers in an organization, according to exclusive new research exploring effectiveness priorities in 2024.
Well, Lululemon and Midstate has work to do on low brand awareness. The premium athletic wear label has been investing in brand building to boost awareness and customer acquisition.
For the first time in a decade, advertising has been bumped off the bottom spot for customer trustworthiness, with the media and government having overtaken it as the least trusted industries amongst the public.
Wow, well, listen to this. Almost 3 in 5 consumers look to engage with online communities when making a purchase, according to the Ernst & Young's Future Consumer Index.
As a UK general election approaches on the 4th of July, consumers are split on whether brands should be involved in politics or not. Over a quarter, that's 28%, feel it's important that commercial brands are involved in politics, while 41% feel that they should steer well clear.
While just a quarter of the UK population has used a generative AI tool in their private lives, according to research by Oxford University's Reuters Institute. Now, this figure falls to 20% for their professional lives.
And a new viral movement is putting A-list celebrities on the digital guillotine, or the digitine, for their silence on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Okay, Pascal, we really do have to go straight back to that first news item, and let's just talk about this appalling statistic that marketers are only getting 1 hour every year to present their results to the company board. That's 5 minutes a month, and you were quite righteously pretty much outraged. I could hear it in your voice as you read that out.
Well, there was a couple of reasons. A, because it took me back to my younger days as a marketing officer, and that's what used to happen. But would like to think, as you mentioned, that I've been around now for nearly 3 decades, as a professional marketer, that thing would have improved like a good bottle of wine. But it shocked me because it worries me then that the statement that you and I've shared on the podcast before, that it's taken such a long time for marketers to have a seat at the boardroom table. And am I getting a sense that we're losing that spot and that marketing's been relegated again as tasks and hacks and tricks, as opposed to something that's very strategic that all board members need to be invested in?
Yeah, that's what I took from this. I mean, the implication is that they're bringing the marketing people into a board meeting only once a year or for 5 minutes a month or whatever it is, as opposed to there being a permanent person sat on the board updating them all the time. And again, is it the fact that we still face this tactical obsession that marketers seem to have rather than strategy? And if we are just becoming tacticians, and if we are just talking about promotion rather than the bigger marketing mix, then maybe that's why we've been demoted from the board again. And we can't say it enough on this show, Pascal, and we will talk to our clients about it when we're out there discussing things with our companies. But you do need to be strategic, and the only way you can get on the board is to reclaim the strategy of marketing as well as the tactics.
And I think that that's almost part of this internal campaign of education and what term I'm looking for. Yeah, you're on the campaign. Sorry, so you mentioned the election a moment ago, but this idea of people actually have some sympathy if you don't understand the function of marketing fully, and your exposure has been mostly to tactics. A story that I can share with our audience today that may help. My claim to fame is before I moved from employment to self-employment, I finally got the board to put marketing and these associated activities number one on the agenda. And the way in which I managed to do this successfully is to actually use the customer journey as the framework for the board meetings. So typically board meetings will have a number of items which were perhaps not necessarily in a very logical order, depending on the mood of the time or the preference of the MD or the chair. But I thought, well, let's almost put the customer in charge of the meeting. So, but the customer journey from discovery all the way to delight and loyalty and so on, can we use that as a framework for the meeting, and then add the bit like operational issues and that kind of thing. So yeah, my parting gift for my last employer was to have marketing number one on the agenda.
Yeah. We'll just keep bashing that drum, won't we, Pascal? We will keep bashing that drum. Marketing needs to reclaim its seat at the boardroom table. But, another item of news here sort of has a bit of a negative tone to it, even though marketing's been bumped off the bottom of the ladder by media and government as the least trusted industries amongst the public. I mean, again, why is marketing not trusted? Is it because we're seen as snake oil salesmen? Is it because we come up with invasive and annoying adverts and interrupt people from enjoying things? I was even doing research for this yesterday, and I was looking on some of the websites that we use to research items for Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. And sometimes it's actually impossible to read an article on a website these days because there are so many ads that pop up and they actually cover the thing that you're trying to read and you can't get rid of them. And in the end, I think, oh, for goodness sake, forget it, and I'll kill the whole website. And ultimately, that's not what the website wants. It wants me to stay on the website and read the articles. Obviously, they probably want me to interact with the adverts as well. But if they make it so annoying that I'm going to close the whole thing down, surely it's not, in their long-term best interest. So it's good that we're no longer the least trusted, but I think we've still got a bit of a mountain to climb, haven't we?
Yeah, and it's just that uncomfortable juxtaposition between advertising, media, and government, because for me, this is about falsehood or the the fear of falsehood. So people are literally pulling away from consuming information, or they're looking at different ways of doing it. And that's unfortunate. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that there are some, very unethical and dishonest organizations out there not using communication techniques to overpromise and underdeliver. But by and large, the vast majority of marketing professionals out there and business leaders have just a desire to communicate in such a way that they attract the right customers, and to kind of being put into the same box as, while you as literally, barely more trustworthy than media and government is unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other one I wanted to talk about today, Pascal, is this whole idea of putting A-list celebrities on a digital guillotine. I was thinking of you when the word guillotine was mentioned, the digitine, as it's been termed. Now, I don't particularly want to focus in on the fact that people are being cancelled because of their views on what's happening in Gaza. I mean, what's happening in Gaza is awful. I don't really think we want to dwell upon that. But what I really wanted to get your opinion on is it ever really right to cancel somebody because they don't have an opinion which matches with yours?
Or simply no opinions, because this is by something. But for me, it almost links back to, one that you mentioned earlier as well, this idea of, well, we don't want essentially commercial brands to be involved in politics, and that kind of things. And my view is that I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with the attack on individuals, brands, and A-listers via social media in particular, because that's an easy way to go about it. We recently had political figures being physically attacked with objects thrown at them and so on. So I'm getting really uncomfortable with the mood at the moment and what's happening. And for me, so now some individuals have found a way to get essentially exercised by silence, let alone having an opinion, and that's kind of interesting. And I wonder how that's going to seep into, let's say, A-list brands as opposed to A-list celebrities. Are they going to feel obligated to express a view that maybe they don't have at all because of a complex situation out there in the world? Because you have two extreme. The moment they express something, they're accused, for example, of greenwashing, though they can't. And then if they say nothing, then they're accused of silence. So I have immense sympathy for the situation, because I don't think that there is a solution apart from essentially not giving in to what is essentially some form of cyberbullying. And I don't know why actually people feel that they have the right to bully an A-lister or an A-list brand, because you wouldn't do that to people out there in the streets. So yeah, very uncomfortable with the whole thing, because we now have a situation where if you're silent, it's seen as a bad thing, let alone when you have an opinion.
Yeah, and I guess social media was always about communication, wasn't it? It was all about having a conversation. And yet, one of the things that social media has done is has almost stopped people having conversations. It's almost as if you either agree with this or you don't, or you have one polarizing view versus the other polarizing view. You can never have a debate about, the whys and wherefores and the positives and negatives of each viewpoint. It's either agree or disagree, or this one or that one. And I think that's a real shame, because healthy debate is usually where decent solutions come from. But if you don't have that healthy debate, then all you're left with is the yes or no, or the left and right, or whatever it's going to be.
For me, it's also about, kind of roles and purposes. And if you have obviously a subject matter that you're particularly passionate about, but you don't want this to be a cross-cutting theme, it just doesn't make sense. So if you take the example of the crisis in Gaza, it needs to be dealt with within a particular environment and a particular communication rule ecosystem. I don't see what you would get as an individual to then have those messages sipping into the world of entertainment or the world of consumer brands and so on. You want actually maybe a respite from all that narrative, and watch a film without being trouble with another A-lister, as expressed to you or not, on X, previously known as Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. So, lots of food for thought there today, Pascal, and we probably could have talked about any of the other news items that we read out at the beginning, but we do need to move on. It's now time to dig deep into some subjects, and we're going to move on to content spotlights. Okay, Pascal. In this section of the show, we bring to the table a video or an article or a podcast and dig deep into its messages. So what have you got for us this week?
Well, I'm really excited because this week I've got an article for you and our viewers and listeners, and this is one that really plays to my passion in life, which is to combat the poor language used sometime in business and in marketing, and in particular acronyms. Now, sometimes we need them because they kind of support the delivery of information, but on occasion they either need a bit of an update or they become so meaningful, such as AI, for example, that they've become meaningless. And I have an article for you published on medium.com from Sena. And the title goes as follows: MVP is over. You need to think about MVE. And I'm going to do just a very top level summary because it's really quite a joyous moment to read this article in full. So I don't want to do too many spoilers, as they are now called. But suffice to say, Pete runs a company called Digital Surgeons, and he's found a way to combine human creativity with leading edge technology. And you and I always say, imagination is by far the most important talent that needs to be nurtured as part of your marketing. So from MVP to MVE, how do we do that? And what is the article about? So it starts really by talking about his own work with founders and leaders of organizations. And this idea of the most founders or most inventors have what it's called the light bulb moment. And he does use that a lot as an analogy and reference, particularly when he talks about Edison as an example. And what he says is, when I reflect on the last 20 odd years of my work, what you find typically is most first-time founders will either underinvest in what they're going to do in terms of the entire marketing mix in particular, or what is called just slap something and test it together based on their gut and literally let the market sort it out. And you end up with something that is either over-invested and not tested, or under-invested, either too feature-light or feature-bloated, which I think is a great, lovely term. And then people say, oh yeah, but what they should have done, those founders, is to go for the MVP, the minimum viable product. And Pete's challenged us, saying, well, actually, if you're not careful, you end up with something that suits you, as in it's minimally valuable to you. So the first switch from MVP to MVE is to challenge the term V, valuable. And his argument would say, we should start to talk about a minimum valuable product or proposition for the audience. That's not enough. You have to move on from that minimum valuable product to minimum valuable E. And what is the E? And this is where it introduces the story of Edison. And I must invite people to read the article because it's really quite good. And it kind of goes, have you noticed that most people, unless they listen to this podcast, particularly This Week in History, would say that Edison invented the light bulb. And the argument is, well, no, it didn't actually. But what it did do is create a product that was really working and that was cost efficient, that wasn't actually full of flaws and whatever. And he even quotes an article quote from the New Yorker saying that Edison did not look for problems in need of solutions. He looked for solutions in need of modification, or you could even argue perfection. And that's essentially how you start to begin your move away from MVP, minimum valuable product, to something that is going to call now minimum valuable experience. And you've got to design something that is going to create a memorable experience for the audience. And that change of language and that change of the kind of the three letters, I think is very, very important, because words have an impact on your own imagination, your own kind of energy, your own stimulation and so on, but also the way in which you're going to see the near future. Because when you design something brand new, and that could be something very simple, like a course, maybe planning a book, or fully fledged business. You have to imagine a future where your customers are delighted by it. And I think the term minimum valuable experience is far more powerful for founders than you might think. So in there, he gives some advice. By the way, if you read the article, there's also some lovely free giveaways and so on. But he talks about how do you begin this, and talks about the ACT framework, ACT, talks about audience, communication, and touch points. So audience, Always start with that. Who are you speaking to in the near future? Communication, what are you trying to say? And then T for touch points, where should you share your messages? Give you a case study about a company called Webflow, the no-code platform for web designer. And the whole article really is got that moment where you kind of stop and go, yeah, maybe I should change the language. For me, for my audience, for my customers, but it's going to drive me very, very differently. Very quickly, I'll close my kind of top-level review because on purpose, I don't want to give too much away from the article with two statements from Pete in terms of this MVE. Remember, two elements. Your story is your strategy and vice versa. If you don't have a story to tell and if it doesn't inform your strategy, you will not have the MVE. And then how you choose to express that story matters and makes all the difference.
This is really interesting. It reminds me of my time in big corporate, Pascal. To be able to produce an MVP, let alone an NVE. When I used to work in financial services, these companies were absolutely bloated with old-fashioned technology and computers from the 60s and 70s. And to create a new product, whether it was an insurance product or a banking product or an investment bond or something like that, it could take up to 18 months to build a product. So there was none of this MVP stuff. You just had to build it. And what you launched was it. You didn't have the luxury of being able to put something out there which was almost like a live test. It actually had to be the finished article. And that was such a stifler of innovation. You couldn't learn from early mistakes and refine it because that development cycle was so long. So to be able to have the luxury that we have nowadays, to be able to develop things quickly and to create these MVPs, MVEs, and refine as we go is a real privilege. And we should not underestimate the power of that and the ability we have to continually delight customers and change the experience in almost a live environment.
Yeah, and that we discussed in the news segment by this idea of the way marketing sometimes is relegated to doing, as I once heard a sales director say, the department for pretty pictures,
Yes.
And I think when you have the MVE, oddly, the experience then invites you to think about the entire marketing mix, and the entire kind of customer journey and so on, which I think is just a great contribution from Pete in terms of challenging the status quo, but inviting discussions internally as well. And I think with the MVE and the ACT framework, you could get in colleagues from across departments to get involved, as opposed to just you in a room. But I feel for you because, so in the 18 months, though, was there a risk that the market would change or the audience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, you could cancel a development and effectively write off the cost, or you could just hope that the market didn't change so much that it would disadvantage you once you got there. But yeah, 18 months, it's a scary thought.
Now, you mentioned in the introduction that you had selection that would include 𝗪𝗲 𝗏𝗪𝗀. I'm a big fan. It's been a while since it's been mentioned on the show. So what is your selection for this?
Do you know, I've not thought of 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗀 for a long time. I used to watch his Gary V, Ask Gary V show pretty much every day. I think I went off him a bit when he started wittering on about Snapchat all the time and this, that, and the other. And I sort of lost touch and just completely by accident came across this article. Now, the heading of the article is "Stop Doing These Three Things on Social Media, Says 𝗪𝗏 𝗏𝗪𝗀." That's the actual heading of the article, clickbait or what. But the actual article is written by Jason Feifer in Entrepreneur magazine. And not only does it say stop doing these three things on social media, he actually does say there are three things you should start doing as well. So I was just drawn into that. And it's the usual sort of Gary V, a little bit, some of it's a bit over the top, but, he does talk sense, does Gary V, even if he's not your cup of tea. And if you don't like the way he presents, you don't like the fact that he swears quite a lot, I think he always does start to talk sense. So I'll just go very, very quickly through the three things to stop. and the 3 things to start. So the first thing is, he says, stop pouring your heart out on LinkedIn. And I think this all stemmed from that story where there was a CEO who had to lay off a load of people, and he did a weeping video on LinkedIn and got a lot of flack for it because he was crying that he'd had to let staff go. But it led to a load of other people doing weeping videos on LinkedIn. And I don't know about you, Pascal, but there's a lot of rubbish on LinkedIn at the moment, and a lot of people just trying to get attention. And this is obviously one way in which people could do it. And what Gary Vee is saying, look, stop it. Business is difficult. And he said he would have had a lot more respect to that weeping CEO if the weeping CEO had just come on and said, I'm sorry I had to fire these people because I want to hit a certain profit margin. It might sound cold, but that's the truth. Now, you might not agree with that, but is it better to be honest rather than, fake tears? So that's the first thing to stop doing. Then I don't know whether you agree with this one. He says what you should start doing is dancing on social media. So he say, TikTok is full of dancing. So should company leaders join in? And he says, yeah, why not? Show that you're a human being. Have some fun. You don't have to do it every day, but let your hair down if you've got any. It's not a bad idea. So maybe we'll see a rush of dancing videos on LinkedIn to replace the sparrow tears LinkedIn videos. Next one to stop is stop doing giveaway campaigns to drive audience growth. And, this is I see this happening a lot, especially on YouTube, where people try to get followers by saying, I'm going to run a competition. You can win 100 quid or 1,000 quid or a subscription to this or tickets to this concert or whatever it is. And what Gary Vee is saying is it will be successful in that you will get followers. But the problem is, it's likely you will only get those followers because they wanted the particular thing that you were giving as your prize. But what they won't become is loyal followers and engaged followers, because if they win, they'll be happy and you'll never see them again. If they don't win, they'll probably never come back to your page anyway, but you'll still have them as followers. So how can you engage people to work with you and to engage with you rather than just trying to trick them by giving them a prize like that? Next thing he says, and you'll love this one, start using AI and especially chatbots. And he says, yes, chatbots are everywhere. And he says they're not perfect yet, but it is worth the effort and we've said this so many times, if you prompt it or brief it correctly and brief it in massive amounts of detail, you will get stuff out that's worthwhile, and it can help you become your digital marketing assistant. Next one, he says, start posting long form content on social. Now, this sort of goes against some of the advice, doesn't it? Because everybody's saying, no. TikTok videos are less than a minute. Shorts are less than a minute. Instagram stories are less than a minute. You don't want to write long articles now. 150 words will do. But he says, we always make the mistake of thinking that people's attention spans are getting shorter. But people's attention spans are only getting shorter for rubbish content. If you give people great content, they will stay. That's why people will watch 10 episodes of a box set or 70 episodes of a box set that's been around for many, many years, repeat seasons. If the quality is good, people will stick with you. So give them good long form content and they'll read it. And what he's saying at the moment is one of the things that's working for him more than ever is actually putting long form content on Twitter. He does actually say, I'm always going to call it Twitter, by the way, not X. But he's saying if you do those posts where you effectively create a thread, and that thread could be 40 separate different tweets, people are reading them. So it's definitely well worth thinking. And the final one is stop having lousy workplaces. Now, again, this plays to the fact that one of the best bits of content you can put out there to show the human side of a business is to let people in through the doors. And what you want, if people come in through the doors, either on video or whatever it is you want them to look like it's a nice environment to work, happy employees, comfortable surroundings. He's saying, you don't need to be cliched like having a foosball table in the corner. That won't cut it. But show people that it's a great place to work and you'll get some good content out of it. So bit random that, I think, Pascal, but actually it was quite nice to re-engage with some of Gary V's wisdom, and I quite liked those three starts and those three stops. What did you think?
What's reassuring is that it's very sensible, very grounding advice, but also it doesn't feel like it's so new that it would take a long time to get your head around. So I find that quite reassuring, quite the contrary of something that I'm thinking, well, I've never heard this before, or I never thought of this before. It's a good reminder. But if you take you start with the first one, with the LinkedIn stuff, I mean, something that Gary Vaynerchuk is very, very strict on is to understand the context of the platform. And that, there are types of stories you can share on LinkedIn, which are not relevant to Facebook, which wouldn't work on TikTok. So actually, I haven't done enough of the research and the audience profiling to understand the context and the content that should be published is so very important, because, I mentioned this with our good friend Natalie Emily, where people say, well, do you know what? I kind of understand why you wanted to share this story, but that's not the platform for it, and vice versa. I'm really pleased about the long form content, because that's something you and I have believed in for quite some time. I mean, case in point, this is a long form bit of content, our audio and video magazine, and you've got to mix it up. And I think you should do short, medium, and long form, because my conviction, is something that I would imagine Gary would share, is how can you establish credibility? I mean, in the news you mentioned about the need to raise brand awareness and as a result build trust. But you can't do that with just a bite-sized bit of content, particularly if they have been designed just to get someone's attention. But how do you then continue the conversation? So no, I think this is a very, very good review of the kind of where you should stop and where you should start.
Excellent. Good content spotlights, as always. Always learn a lot from this part of the show. But now, Pascal, it's time for us to head back in time. So we're going to fire up the flux capacitor. We're going to set the controls of the TARDIS. We are going to head back in time to this week in history.
In 1936, Edwin H. Armstrong demonstrated his invention of FM radio in Washington by comparing FM and AM audio signals with identical recordings. And of course, FM was clear of the hissing, buzzing, and crackling static noises of AM.
In 1975, Jaws, based on the book by Peter Benchley, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw, was released.
In 1991, Everything I Do It For You single is released by Bryan Adams and became the Billboard Song of the Year in 1991.
In 2011, The Green Lantern, the superhero film based on the DC Comics character of the same name, premieres in Los Angeles. Overall, the film received negative reviews, with critics calling Green Lantern noisy, overproduced, and thinly written. So, Pascal, was Green Lantern noisy, overproduced, and thinly written?
Yes, and I loved it for that. So let's start with that then. So such a long time ago already. And isn't that interesting? So the Green Lantern was essentially an attempt by the producers and DC Comics to launch their own form of franchise. They were a few years behind, you can argue, of Marvel, not by much. And they thought, well, let's start. And for me, for all, in this week in history, we have 3 references to movies, if you include the song from Robin Hood, Princes of Thieves. But it's this idea of making decisions from a marketing point of view, product, place, price, all that kind of things. And promotion is a kind of interesting one, because they decided to start with a character that wasn't particularly well known compared to all the DC comics. You had Batman and Superman and all the others, and start a Ryan Reynolds in the character, and the movie really wasn't liked. So I didn't go and see it, and then eventually it was maybe on streaming services, and I sat down and watched it thinking, well, it's nowhere near as bad as people admitted to this. So I would argue that the critics were just as noisy and over, just and thinly written as that. But, for the point of view of what could have happened to Ryan Reynolds, you could just say, well, that could be a career ender as a superhero. And not only was he criticized for Green Lantern, but his rendition in one of the X-Men movies, remember, he played Deadpool and was very, very poorly kind of presented on screen. And despite all of that, he ended up, being Deadpool, ended up doing sequels and so on, and being very successful in what they're filming. So for me, it's a lesson in, yes, sometimes you're not going to hit the mark. Sometimes you're going to make a decision that seems wise. Let's begin the franchise with something like Green Lantern and not the obvious choices from the audience point of view. And then you've got this sticky, poor reputation. And yet you can still get on, and yet you can still produce, good content and people. And he's interviewed, and he still laughs by the Green Lantern, and he still says, "Listen, we gave it a go. We tried our very best. I get it. I had a good time. People are going back to it all those years later, and say, well, maybe we were a little harsh." I think it's just a lesson in basically not giving up on your dreams.
Indeed, indeed. And you should never, ever give up on your dreams. Do you know, Pascal, when I did the research for This Week in History this week and I saw Jaws, I immediately thought, if I go into the document that we share to prepare, I would have convinced that the Jaws would already have been in the list, that you would have chosen it. So I was quite surprised when it wasn't there, which is why I chose it, because I know it's one of your favorite films. But the reason I wanted to pick this is that even though this film is coming up to 50 years old now, which is scary, isn't it? It's still a masterclass in suspense, in storytelling, and in acting. And we all know that the shark was made of rubber, and it isn't the most particularly realistic looking shark, but it's still one hell of a movie, and it's scary as well. I recently watched a film, it's on Netflix. It's called Under Paris. Is it called Under Paris? Yeah, it's called Under Paris or Beneath Paris. And it's about a gigantic shark that goes into the River Seine in Paris and starts eating people. And they have gone full CGI on this. And Pascal, it is an absolute and utter pile of shark crap. It really is awful. And the CGI doesn't save it. The shark is realistic, millions times more realistic than the shark in Jaws. But the film is just an abomination. The storytelling is rubbish. The motivations of the characters are unbelievable, moronic. And some of the things that they do are just beyond belief. And it just made, when I saw Jaws come up there, I thought, do you know what? This is such a massive lesson that if you've got the right story and you tell that story in the right way, you don't have to have all of the flashy special effects and everything. And that Beneath Paris or Under Paris film absolutely proves the point. And if you're watching or listening to the show today and you have got that bookmarked on your Netflix, please take it off your bookmark and don't watch it. It is just absolutely awful.
Do you know what's interesting? So, everyone, we have reviewed the marketing of Jaws in previous episode of Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast. So seek it out in a kind of watch list. You're going to hear and watch how much Roger and I love the film, but also the marketing at the time. But to your point, so next year is a 50th anniversary. I mean, I'm beyond excitement about what they're going to do for that. And one of my hope is that, that they've done a stage show of the stories behind, the Jaws. I think it's called The Shark is Broken. And the whole premise is about the three actors you've listed on inside the orca, and having discussions in between the takes. And people said it's an amazing show. It's only been in the US for now, so it's coming to the UK very, very soon. But it's exactly that, which is once you tell a good story, everything else doesn't kind of matter. The fact that the shark is really fake, clearly, and that kind of things, because you're drawn in at such an emotional level. And Steven Spielberg has been interviewed many a time, and I'm wondering whether sometimes thinks, I've done other things than Jaws, guys. But his asked, he said, well, I kind of knew that there would be a point in the movie where the audience will really love the characters or love to hate some of the characters as well. And by that time, it's okay to reveal the shark, no matter how, all the time, how poorly designed it may seem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we always say, Pascal, we owe a massive debt to the people who did all these wonderful things in the past so that we have all the tech, the apps, the storytelling, and the films here in the present. Talking about marketing tech and apps, that is the next section of the show. So let's go straight into marketing tech and apps. Okay, Pascal, what technological marvels have you uncovered for us this week?
Well, do you remember we mentioned earlier about imagination, creativity combined with the use of technologies? So you and I are more and more involved in explaining how to use AI for the better and to support your activities. But there is a challenge, this business of briefing the AI platform. You and I prefer the term briefing than prompt, but if you want to, it could be a prompt. So I'm going to give some recommendation in terms of practicing and honing your AI briefing skills, no matter whether you're going to be using ChatGPT or Gemini and all the others. So the first one is from Google. And they have a platform which they don't really promote as actively as they should, called AI Test Kitchen, which is quite charming. So the AI Test Kitchen by Google gives you access to a number of beta in development solutions. There's one that I'm waiting for, kind of, which I hope they're going to release in the UK, called a video effects. You'll be able to write a number of briefs and video animation will appear. But the one I want to mention is around music and images. I don't know about you, but it's probably quite straightforward to brief an AI to produce maybe a document or to produce, a review strategy. But when it comes to music, if you don't have the language, if it comes to an image, if you're not sure what words you should be using or what qualities of image and some of the technical stuff you should be using, then it could be a big ask. Now, the good thing with AI Test Kitchen, they give you some pro forma briefings. So they kind of give you, well, here's a start to the prompt, to the briefing, and then feel free to change the words. But because you can see the briefing and the descriptors that they've used, you learn an enormous amount about the language of music, which may not be obvious to all. And then you can create up to 70-second little kind of background music that could be used for a future video or maybe for an intro to a podcast and so on. And then the same with images. I mean, you might say, well, it can't be that hard to describe what you want. Yes, to a point, but once you can describe maybe the scene, for example, Roger, it's hard to describe then the quality of the image or image you want. Do you want hand drawns? Do you want maybe something that is more like film-like? And what about the light quality? What about the density, the contrast? So all those things that if you're not a pro photographer, you might miss. So that you can learn from the prompt. And then the next one I want to mention, in addition to AI Test Kitchen, is something called Word Hero. And Word Hero is this kind of AI dashboard that helps you write a number of things, from the blog article to social media post or even a CV and so on. But what is nice, very much like the AI Test Kitchen, Word Hero, I've got templates or almost like a form. So they ask you questions to essentially invite you to put together a very detailed brief before you go ahead. And I think that's going to be a lot more helpful to people new to briefing than being faced with, just the search bar on Copilot and then over to you to write a very good brief. Word Hero has done some of the thinking for you. So it's either pre-populated and then you can change the text, or it's simply a number of boxes you have to fill in to eventually educate Word Hero what to do. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very important. When people talk about AI skills, I think that's what they mean. You are a skilled operator because you know how to brief the different platforms.
One of the things that AI is crystallizing in my head, and this whole briefing process is the key to it in my head, is that before AI, rubbish content existed, didn't it? We see rubbish articles, we see rubbish videos. And I think that's because even before AI, some marketing people, for whatever reason, just don't have good ideas, or they haven't done the research to come up with the proper customer proposition. And therefore, they haven't really got anything to talk about. They're just winging it, or they're making it up as they go along. But what we're seeing here is the need to do these detailed briefs to get really good content out. And maybe that's the positive that's going to come from AI, not the actual generation of the stuff itself, but the discipline that we're now starting to make people realize is important to get all of that information into the AI in the first place. And that, if that means having to answer questions like, who is your customer? What is their problem? How does your product or service meet their need better, preferably different to everybody else, etc., etc. We're going to start being like marketers again by actually asking the questions to come up with the really interesting ideas and the really interesting products. So this week, Pascal, I went on a little trip down to Leeds, mainly to do another of my railway hotel videos, which I've been doing on my Rog channel. But I was really excited about this because Leeds is where I used to go to university. The scary thing is that it is 40 years in October, this coming October, since I started my degree course. I had a wander around the campus at Leeds University the other day, and it was quite emotional, I have to say. On the one hand, there was so much of the place was so familiar, and yet on the other hand, so many things had changed since that it almost felt completely different. It was almost like the buildings were skins, but everything else was different. If that makes sense. But I did get quite emotional going back into the University Union building and having a drink of beer in the old bar, which I used to spend so much of my time in when I was a student. But I also went and had a little wander around the Edward Boyle Library. Now, apart from the Union Bar, the Edward Boyle Library is probably the place I spent most of my time when I was at Leeds University. And that's where you would go to research the papers that you were putting together for your exams, for your degree course. But of course, in those pre-internet days, we quite literally had to go into this gigantic library. And this library is about 7 floors worth of books, Pascal. And you would have to search for the books, and then you'd have to go through the books to find the articles, to find the quotes that you wanted to then put into your essays and your papers for your exams. And it just got me thinking about, students these days. Yes, that library is still there, and it still has 7 floors, and it still has 7 floors of books. So I'm sure people are still going in there and reading books. But of course, now we've got the internet, we can do whatever we like. So I just thought, what do students do for research, for academic research? And I came across 2 interesting apps. The first one is called 𝗪𝗓𝗡�ry. And this is one that you can get on the Apple Store or the Android Store. And it quite literally hosts hundreds of thousands of academic articles. In fact, it claims to have access to over 100 million research papers and academic articles. And what is interesting about this, I guess, from the point of view of us and how we're seeing things develop, is that all this does is effectively gives you a way of searching for them. So you might put in, I'm doing a research paper on, I don't know, COVID vaccines or something, and it will come back with a load of articles that you can read and the source of those articles. What it isn't going to do is answer any specific questions you've got. And that's where this next one comes in, which is called the Consensus app. Now, this looks suspiciously like a chat GPT cut down. They just call it a GPT, don't they? It's like a branded version of chat GPT. But this is specifically for answering questions, but the answers are derived from presumably a similar source of research papers and articles. So as you would expect with an AI orientated app, you can go in, you can ask the questions you want about COVID apps, or you can ask the question you want about aerodynamics or whatever it is, and Consensus will give you the answers to those questions. But most importantly, for the purposes of your exam and for the paper you're putting together, it will quote the source, when it was written, who it was written by, and where you can find the original. So A little trip down to Leeds University and a sit in the Edward Boyle Library led me to this week's Marketing Tech and Apps.
And here's a perfect example, everyone, about storytelling. Thank you very much, Roger. I was there with you. It was just absolutely amazing in terms of what you shared. I did that many, many years ago. I went back to Bordeaux University, and like you, it was the same. It wasn't quite the same, and it was a strange feeling, isn't it? It's almost like you're almost grieving for what used to be and having to accept, the changes. Yeah, absolutely. But isn't that fascinating? And just for obvious listeners, just to be clear, I mean, of course, Roger and I love new techs and new apps, but only that they serve our purpose as strategists and in our content creators. I would say it again, the tech does not maketh the marketer.
Absolutely. The tech does not maketh the marketer. That's a great quote. All right, Pascal, we've reached the part of the show that we always get really excited about. It's film marketing. We're going to be talking about Flight of the Phoenix, the 2004 remake of the 1965 film, right after this. So this week's film is Flight of the Phoenix, which was released in 2004. 20 years ago, and it's a remake of a film of the same name. Actually, I think the film in 1965 was called The Flight of the Phoenix, whereas this is only called Flight of the Phoenix. But anyway, here's the trailer for Flight of the Phoenix.
Where are we? 2,000 miles west of our course.
It's a big desert, isn't it?
Someone's coming for us, though, right?
What kind of odds do you give us?
No radio, very little water. If we try to walk out of here, we're gonna last about 2 days.
I suppose there'll be a Four Seasons hotel out here, will it?
I can get us out of here.
What do you know about airplanes?
I designed them.
What the hell is he talking about?
He's talking about building a new airplane.
Out of the old one.
For 10 survivors, choosing to do the impossible is the only choice they've got.
If a man can't have faith in something, what else does he have?
We're either all in this together or no one at all.
I'm in charge, and I don't need to ask anyone anything.
I'm not taking orders from you. What are they waiting for?
They're waiting till we're too weak to fight back.
Do not tell them what a plane is.
We gotta get out of here. Come on, give me some help!
It's coming.
It's storming forward 100 miles an hour! We gotta cover the engine! We just need more time!
Everyone here is dispensable except me.
Can we finish the airplane?
Say please.
Oh, Pascal, watched that again last night, and it's a decent adventure film, isn't it? It's good. It's actually got a lot of action in it. The cinematography is fabulous, and the model work is great. Before we get into the argument of whether it's better than the original, though, why did you choose this particular film?
Well, two things. It's reappeared on one of my streaming services, and it was the memory of going to the movies and having a great time. So I kind of watched it again, and I realized, oh my goodness, this was released in 2004, which I'd forgotten about. So I'm thinking, yet another anniversary, and then my mind went, hang on a minute. Didn't we review some time ago, The Day After Tomorrow, which was about the Earth getting very, very cold? I remember you saying to me, well, I could feel the cold, Pascal. That then so happened to be released in 2004 as well. and starring Dennis Quaid in one of the leading roles. So I'm thinking I'm going to treat Roger to the other extreme and take him into, into the desert, and in this case, to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. But yeah, I would agree with you. And then when I did the research, as we'll discuss in a moment, there was this constant kind of pull between in this idea of no, the 1965 is much better than this one from the critics, and there was kind of, and I'm thinking, well, can't we have both? Can't we appreciate both movies? We shall see. But yeah, I would agree, a really great survival movie, and that crash sequence is truly terrifying, and the way in which it was filmed and created was very good. And then you have the entire survival. And I remember asking my wife Denise, what would you prefer, extreme cold or extreme heat? Because that, back to what you were saying with regard to Day After Tomorrow and this one, you can relate to thirst, can't you? You can relate to extreme heat and what it does to you and the ability to function. And then the entire movie, of course, is about working together. And in fact, when you look at the posters, the tagline, if they stand together, they stand a chance. And unless you've seen the original, which I did do, but I don't remember a great deal about it, apart from, once again, a great contribution to cinema. If this is your first foray into Flight of the Phoenix, you don't know how this is going to end, which I think is also quite an exciting bit of the storytelling.
Yeah, no, it's a good story, and again, you and I fly quite a lot in our jobs. We're often on aeroplanes, going to conferences, etc., etc. And there's just something really scary about seeing a plane get into trouble like that, and seeing people sort of gripping the seats and hanging on, and then that almost like utter despair that they've got when they know that they're 200 miles away from any form of human habitation. And that's when the real fear sinks in, doesn't it? You think, how on earth are they going to get out of this? And there's just something raw about that, because it's a situation which is very unlikely to happen to the majority of us. But when you do sit on a plane and you've seen a film like this, you just don't want to be reminded of the possibilities, do you?
It's just, tapping into your primal fear, not similar to movies we reviewed, being lost, not knowing whether you're going to get a rescue, water and food is in short supply. You've got the heat, and as we'll see through it, and seen in the trailer as well, which by the way is very well constructed. We must have a look at this. But you have the extreme weather as well, and then you have enemies, intruders. You've got all that going on. But my memory of watching this version in particular is, although that's not something that I am as passionate as you are, I think the aircraft it's a stunning bit of aircraft, the C-119, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and this is interesting. I mean, I do have memories of watching the original film. I then went back. I haven't watched the original film for many, 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 many years, but I did go back and check that it is actually the same type of aircraft, and it is. I did wonder whether they would have gone for a different sort of aircraft, but I guess the way that they construct the Phoenix, which is a plane that they used to fly out of the desert on, I guess it relies upon this style of aircraft for them to be able to achieve the rebuilding of it. But yeah, it's an aircraft that I originally thought had been made up for the purposes of the film. But it is actually a genuine aircraft, and they did use genuine aircraft and, of course, models in the sequence. So yeah, it's a gorgeous. It's the sort of thing you would see at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Museum of Flight just along the road. But to see this thing actually in service is really quite remarkable.
I think it's the silver, kind of, which
Yeah.
was also a gift to the filmmakers from a cinematography point of view. It's just sheer size of it, but also clearly, because when I did a bit of research, this was built for the American military. The fact that it could be dismantled and built again, and that's usually what they used to do, even with the vehicles, like cars and buses and trucks and that kind of things. But of course, like all movies we've reviewed using natural location, this was filmed in the Namib Desert, the coast of Africa. And you kind of think, why do you want to do that to yourself? Because like movies like The Mummy that we reviewed and so on, of course, they had to contend with sand getting everywhere.
Everywhere.
But also something that you don't think about, but because they were in the same location, unlike other movies where they sometimes go on the set, the wind would actually change the dunes. So they had issue with continuity. So I read that
Yes.
they had a new job created for people called a dune groomer. And actually, if you watch the credits, as I do, you'll find them listed. And you have those poor people having to go on the dunes and find ways to reshape them the way they were during a previous shot.
Oh my goodness.
It's just a trying experience. And then, of course, you had incidents or when they were actually shipping the aircraft, one of the ferry actually sank with bits of it and bits of this had to try and do it again. And so it went on, accident, including sadly people getting injured during one of the smaller model airplane crashing into where they were working and so on. So a trying bit of filmmaking, let alone the film marketing. And I think that's probably part of the reason why when they are interviewed, the cast and crew, it's a mixed emotions that they have. So yeah, we went out and created a great story, but it was just a tough shoot. And then add on to that, which is probably a segue for us in terms of marketing, this very strange obsession by the vast majority of the critics to say, well, it is so similar to the 1965 films. What was the point? And it feels a bit harsh and kind. And I'm thinking, well, what's the point? Well, maybe quite simply, it would be quite hard to try and entice a younger audience. Can you imagine a situation where maybe you and I, our younger self, would be told by our parents, let me take you to the movie and see something that was filmed, 40 years ago. And you would say, no, that's all right, I'll pass. So I don't have an issue with remakes, so long as they are good remakes. And I think that on this occasion, it is a good remake.
It is a good remake, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you've got that hurdle to get over to get a younger audience to watch it. If they've never heard of James Stewart and Ernest Borgnine, who were in the original, that's potentially a barrier for them to watch it. Whereas, okay, this remake's 20 years old now, but people know who Dennis Quaid is, and the other stars of this film, and that is a reason for them to go and see it. So I don't buy some of those arguments that the critics made. It is a good remake. It's exciting, and okay, it doesn't stray too far from the original, but the original was a very successful film as well. So why completely change it when it was a winning formula in the first place?
So we watched the trailer a moment ago, and I'm always fascinated by the way in which trailers are constructed because it must be very, very hard. I know it is actually because I'm helping on occasion some of my coaching clients where you've got something that is nothing short of 2 hours, and within those 2 hours, you have to find segments to create a trailer that would be in the realms of 90 seconds or even 2 minutes. I can only imagine the anguish and agony in terms of how you do that. But before we talk about the trailers, I wanted to kind of spend a moment to talk about the posters and what I've done for you in the research. Bear in mind the way in which the critics have chosen to compare the two. Let's use that to our advantage. And I put on one side the 2004 poster for you, Roger, and then the 1965 poster, because actually they are completely different eras of filmmaking and film marketing, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And there are similarities, obviously. And the aircraft seems to draw your eye in both of the posters, doesn't it? But of course, the actors in the modern version are much more prominent in the poster, whereas in the old version, the words are more prominent and the actors are almost faded into the background. One thing that did interest me a little bit is that in the poster for the original, there's looks like a belly dancing lady in the background. I do not remember her being on the plane, so I imagine that's probably a scene or a flashback or something. But I just thought that was a bit of a weird thing for the poster. Maybe that was just a way of grabbing people's attention.
Yeah, now the scene I'm using memory here is, do you know, when they have to contend with the marauding kind of tribe? I think she's rescued from them in the 65 version. And again, because of different times, in this occasion, we had a female character played by Miranda Otto, but she was an engineer. times have moved on. I mean, I do like the 1965 poster because it's back to the idea where they used to be hand-drawn and hand-painted, and it's really amazing artwork. But back to the words, you literally have the statement, its excitement is heading straight for you. And then you have a montage of the, and I think the 2004 version, we have literally the aircraft, almost piercing through the poster as it's hitting the dune in original version. It's great, but the symmetry is respected, everything is there. So my thinking is more actually, are we talking about 2004 being an homage to the 1965 movie and 64? And once again, were the critics a bit too quick to dismiss it as not worth your while? But I want to talk about the trailer. And I've done, just for you, Roger, a trailer breakdown, as I like to do on occasion, because I want to understand the decision-making behind it. So this trailer that we watched a moment ago is about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And how was it broken down and what were the different segments? So you had the first 25 seconds, I thought was really clever, is the audio and transcription of the Mayday call from Captain Frank Towns, played by Dennis Quaid. And we almost get the impression this is meant to be seen and heard from a traffic control, maybe, room, and there's just a computer screen with a green monochrome and so on. 25 seconds where we hear that there's something, has happened. And then literally we jump straight into a 15-second montage of the crash, with all the kind of showcasing the special effects, natural location. And then there's some very, very interesting sequences that always start with a few words uttered by the actors. So we have 20-second segment started with "Where are we?" And then you have kind of video sequence highlighting the peril and the challenge. And a bit later, we have 30 seconds starting with "I can get us out of here," with wonderful 𝗵𝗵𝗲 𝗪𝗶𝗶𝗵𝗂 playing the role there. And we have a sequence where they try and find the solution to their problem. And we get the voice. We need the voice back in all the trailers. And we have 30 seconds where we have the conflict then. And the setbacks, starting with "I am in charge. I do not need to ask anyone anything." And that's just like not what you want when you're stuck in the desert, someone, that kind of rebellion taking place there. And then final montage, 20 seconds, where it's all very fast, and it finishes with this line, "And we finished the plane." And then we have this mad-looking 𝗵𝗵𝗲 𝗪𝗶𝗶𝗵𝗂 saying, "Say please." And you go, wow. I mean, I thought that was just a great way to set the jeopardy, to set everything in place, and really sell the movie really well.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like about this is I think that sort of green monochrome computer screen, whilst it's a good idea, I felt it went on too long. And I do wonder whether they lost people in that part. And I think that there wasn't enough attention grabbing. The rest of the trailer works really well for me, but I thought, oh, come on, this is going on a bit, this green bit, isn't it? So I thought maybe that might have lost some people who were casual viewers.
And I think, to your point, it doesn't appear at all in the movie. So, was added an afterthought, because actually, I mentioned a moment ago that trailers are typically 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and this is 2 minutes, 20 seconds. So was this a bolt-on because somebody lost their nerves, or they had a focus group? And then
could well have been. Could well have been.
That. And then, of course, the 1965 trailer is fascinating because of its time. It's much longer, quite repetitive in nature, but that was right for the audience at the time. And where the difference lies between 65 and 2004, the 65 really leans into the actors. And there's almost like an entire minute where you have every single actor being kind of showcased with a freeze framing, and then their names appearing. So a lot more leaning into the actors and the book, for that matter. And I thought it was fascinating to kind of see the difference in terms of using the different assets and so on. And I couldn't have a right smile, because again, now 60 years later, wouldn't do that, but finishing with a voice saying, sometimes a motion picture sets the screen on fire. And you kind of go, yeah, very cheesy, but at the time it probably got people quite excited to go and see the movie. But here we are, in 2004, this movie was really hard to make, probably had all sort of delays, probably went over budget, sadly, over time and so on. I did manage to find the official website, thanks to the Wayback Machine. And yeah, nice website with where you can access, the trailer, the synopsis, your photos and so on. And it's hard to sometimes remember that 2004 was the beginning of the internet, and therefore this may feel like a very superficial types of website where people can actually have time there. But I want to talk to you about then the challenges that came with the marketing. I want to go back then to the very first one, which is that it was compared with the 1965 movies, and the critics were so harsh. I mean, there was a New York Times writer, Stephen Holden, who literally wrote a review with the title "Stuck in the Desert on the Limb," and spent the whole article basically saying, well, if you really want to go, but I wouldn't go. This is a rickety update of the far superior 1965 movie. Why not? One of our kind of movie critic heroes, Roger Ebert, was a bit more balanced. He basically said, I'm not recommending it for those who know the original, but it might work nicely enough for those who have not. Yeah, I mean, was it fair? Because, I mean, what were they expecting? For people to deviate from the book and then be criticized for deviating from the book? They couldn't win, but maybe the error was not making it clear that this was an homage to the original?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think it's rock and hard place, isn't it? Or rock and sandy place. If they deviated from the original film more, I would imagine the critics would have slagged them off for that as well. Oh, they've gone far too far away from the source material. It's not like the book. It's not like the film. I still don't have a problem with it. They've reinterpreted it with actors that a younger audience will associate themselves with, and with the best will in the world. The original is a good movie. But nobody, no Gen Zs and millennials know who James Stewart is, etc. And Ernest Borgnine. They are actors of the past, and it was a legitimate remake just from the point of view of bringing it up to date with more recognizable faces. I think one thing I do think though. And I will have to go back and watch the original. But I did think that the people in the original looked as if the desert had affected them a lot more than the more modern one. Because in the trailer, they really do look as if their skin's been blistered by the sun, and they look as if they're half starved. Whereas, in the modern remake, yes, they are in the desert. Yes, they haven't got much to eat, but they don't look as if they are having too bad a time of it.
Do you know that actually that's exactly what I thought when I was watching the 1965? Like, the makeup effects seem to have worked a little harder there. The second challenge I'd like you to tell us more about, which is the idea of the release date.
Yeah, I mean, they released it in the States on the 17th of December, so a week before Christmas. It's not exactly an ideal Christmas movie, is it? I mean, it just seems to be a strange place to put it. So it affected the box office takings. It was up against Lemon Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events and that Robert De Niro film Meet the Fockers, which I thought was a dreadful film. God knows how that ever managed to get so many sequels. And there was almost the implication that the film was delayed, because the trailer suggests a release in the autumn and the poster promotes a Thanksgiving release, but it didn't appear until just before Christmas. So not really sure what the logic was behind that.
Yeah, it's a tough one because films are judged, I think, sometimes unfairly, the weekend takings, or at least the first two weekends. And yeah, that's not top of the list, is it, around Christmas? You want to be entertained. You want something cheerful. Oddly, you want something with snow.
Or a skyscraper.
Yes. So yeah, tough one. I think. I mean, what was the option to delay it further till the following spring and summer? And with regard to 20th Century Fox, whose brand appear on the trailer, they probably have such a slate of movies they had to fit it in. But I don't think that helped at all. Then add on to that what I thought was a really drawn out release schedule. I mean, if you think that this movie was released in the Christmas time, 2004, in the UK, we had to wait till March of 2005. In France, it was May 2005. And literally the rollout ended up in Australia in July 2005. So that's a very long time. And I think as a result of which you can't quite get that noise. You can't quite get that excitement from the critics or the reviewers and the moviegoers. Just one of those that would appear almost surprisingly as part of the other movies being released at the same time, let's say in March 2005, and would compete against others. So, yeah, I don't think that was particularly helpful either. Release in Christmas and then something that took a better part of 7 months to have that global release.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think we're so used to everything happening at once now, aren't we? That when you see a release schedule drawn out like that, you just think, I don't get the logic to it.
So for me, not only is this year the 20th anniversary, but I'd like to invite people to revisit Flight of the Phoenix and maybe put to one side what you remember, maybe what you've read at the time. This is a great movie. You will spend a good afternoon or good evening in family watching this because it's got that survival thing, which is what would I do in that situation?
Yeah, and it's not too long either. We seem to be going through a phase at the moment where movies are about 3.5 hours long. This is a short, rollicking 2 hours, isn't it? Just short of 2 hours, and it is a good one-sitting movie, and it's exciting, and it's just a good film, really good film.
Super.
So Pascal, thank you for choosing it. I still think I will go back and watch the original, and maybe we'll have a follow-up in a few months' time to see what we think. Thank you everybody for watching or listening to this episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Pascal and I have really enjoyed researching the content for this episode, the content spotlights to the film, to the marketing, tech and apps, etc. But if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about, whether it's a film, whether it's a marketing piece of technology or an article or a podcast or a film that you've seen, do let us know. Talk to us on the YouTube channel or look for us on Twitter, /X, or whatever it's called today. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next episode, please do go out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.